We are looking at complex ecosystem from a very far away perspective, so on a very high level, holistic, if you want, thermodynamic, as we will see, approach. Okay. And the modeling approach we're discussing today is that of trophic network analysis, or if you want, ecological network analysis, and we'll discuss some of the tools available for evaluating the performance of an ecosystem in terms of network analysis. What we will discuss today, we'll introduce static models, in particular static food web models, and the software that we will discuss today is called EcoPath, that is up to now a standard de facto after 20 years of modeling trophic networks. EcoPath was written by Willie Christensen at the University of British Columbia. And it is a way, it was, in the beginning, it was a tool thought as an analysis tool for fishery systems when we discovered that this type of analysis, network analysis, may be very useful in order to evaluate ecosystem performance. So this is a very ecological approach in evaluating the state of natural systems. We will introduce then network analysis, in particular some example, but we will go very quickly, just give you some ideas, some hints. Then it is up to you if you are interested in the topic to go and read and find materials where internet is plenty of this kind of materials. And then we will introduce the concept of food web simulations. So we will have no equation describing the dynamicity of a state variable. So this is a steady state model. In practice, what we do a snapshot of the state of the system. The system is considered then to be in steady states. So this means that in our language, the values are averaged over the appropriate time span. And as we will see the example we will present later, we have, for example, 1 year or 6 months time spans. The system is described, at least in the beginning, as a zero-dimension system, so no spatial heterogeneity. The values are averaged over space. The fundamental hypothesis is always the same, coming from the first principle of thermodynamics. The idea is that flows are balanced. What it goes into a system is equal to what it goes out. If you do not understand this, please stop me and we may discuss this. The idea is that the flows are balanced. What goes in is equal to what goes out from the system. So energy is conserved. It is just transformed in different forms. It might seem that this hypothesis is very strong, but after 1 month, 2, 3 months, 4 months of the modeling class, now you understand that this hypothesis, it is not as strong as it seems, but you have always to keep it in mind that is an hypothesis. This means that you have to be sure that there's nothing very particular what's happening in your system that unbalances the flows, so that requires you to come into play different analytical tools. What are the advantages of using static models? The advantages, of course, provide important information on the system flows and storages. So remember that the tool we will discuss today was conceived as a tool for evaluating fishery systems, so fish stocks in seas, essentially, or fish stocks in an aquatic ecosystem. So what we are looking for is a tool that provides information on system flows and storages in particular. System flows, and now with our language, it means consumptions and production. We are switching from a differential equations perspective out of dynamic modeling to algebraic equations. So this is much more simple, and we may often find analytical solutions to the systems of differential equation that we write. We need fewer data, so it is easier the development and the parameterization of the model, and it has a low, very low computational costs compared to dynamic state models. Provide a clear average picture of the system, so we are looking at static photographs, static picture of the systems evolving in time. It is easy to compare different steady states resulting from different sets of forcing functions. So we have a clear connection between the forcing function that act on the systems and the effects on the state of the system in terms of changing the structure of the system. Many elements can be included, and we will see soon an example of that. What are the limitations of these approaches? Of course, dynamic behavior, for example, transitions cannot be simulated. So the focus here is analytic rather than predictive. So we are looking what we see now, and we are not going to make predictions. We're just doing analysis, as I told you, snapshots, photographs of the status of the system. So this means that it is difficult to extrapolate the results to other systems. So this means that, as we will see from the example, that once you build a trophic network analysis model, then this model will be or is to be applied to the system that you are built the model on. So it is very difficult or almost impossible to translate the results or to extrapolate the results of your model to system different from those that you employ to build your analytical model. Of course, we use the network paradigm. We have already seen the boxes and arrows modeling scheme. So network models are applied in many scientific fields, for example, from hydraulics, electronics, epidemiology, neural networks, sociology, and in particular ecology. I recall you that the network of the arrows and box paradigm, I have tried to exemplify that this schema implies that we are subdividing our system into functional groups, 1, 2, 3, the boxes, and then we are trying to indicate or to evaluate which are the flows of the media between the boxes, and the flows are indicated with J13 or J31. I recall you that these are oriented flows. This means that J31 is different from J13. J31 means what is going from compartment 3 to compartment 1, while J13 is the reverse flow, but what is going from compartment 1 to compartment 3. And of course, also internal recycling, as you may expect, is an important aspect that has to be taken into consideration. What are the assumptions? Of course, system is described as a graph of nodes, compartments, and arcs, edges, or flows, so boxes and arrows. And we link the topology. The link is between the topology of a network and qualitative and quantitative aspects. So what we are trying to link here is that we try to find descriptors that links the structure of a network, the so-called topology, to the qualitative and quantitative aspects of a network. I recall you that the powerfulness of this approach is that of providing a way of calculating overall indicators, like, for example, the overall total system throughput, TSC, that is the sum of all the flows that are happening into the system. And this way of describing is very particular, the focus on processes, interaction among objects, and not on the properties of the single object. So what we are describing here are really interactions and not the property of a single objects that are interacting. So what's a trophic network? In our perspective, a trophic network is a food web. I recall you that trophic network means trophos, from Greek means food. So a trophic network is a food web or an exchange, a network of exchange of foods. So trophic concerns feeding, And what we are looking at are interaction between the objects that appear into my ecosystem in terms of chains, traffic chains, or traffic networks. Typically, historically, ecologists like to concentrate on traffic chains, what means linear analysis in terms of exchanges of foods, feeds concerning the elements. But now it is clear that the linear approach is not satisfactory anymore. What we shall look on is instead on analysis of networks of exchanges. So the idea is that, for example, if you look at a marine food web chain, in chain terms, you start from phytoplankton, but is predated by zooplankton, but is on its turn is predated by small fishes, mammals, and so on. The idea is that of trophic chains of what are grazing. Grazing means transfer of primary production from one compartment to another. But the important aspect of trophic network that has become very apparent in the latest year is that we cannot describe traffic chains and primary productions or consumption chains without including a very important part of the description, what is detritus. Detritus, it is a kind of sink in which all the matter, all the material, biological material, enter and exits from. So it is a point of transformation of biological material, or if you want, biochemical structures, in which this material is, if you want, recycled in order to be made available to the successive consumers. So the idea of traffic networks is that of asking ourselves who is who, and in particular, how much. So we shall individuate the flows of exchanges, so J13, J31, but you've seen before in the boxes and arrows model. And in particular, we have to be able, we shall be able, or we would like to be able to quantify the importance of these flows, or how much it is consumed by whom. To this story, so the interaction between the elements, the animals, the living elements or the living objects in our system, we have to include also the detritus, which is, as I told you, the sink of all the dead matter and the starting point for recycling of biological elements. In building a trophic network models, you start by observing that each compartment represents a group of organisms which are homogeneous according to some characteristics. Example, you may cluster into the same compartment all the organisms that have the same diet. What does this mean? This means that all the organisms that feed on the same group of suborganisms or on the same group of food, of prey, shall be clustered into a group. So this means group of organisms that are clustered according to some characteristics. For example, for each compartment, the biomass and the flows shall be quantified. In particular, we analyze in detail each compartment, so each group of organisms that share the same characteristic, and we try to put numbers into the biomass, how much of these organisms. We try to evaluate the flows in terms of how much these organisms consume and how much these organisms are predated. So you have an inflow that is called consumption and an outflow that is called predation. I recall you that the EcoPath model were conceived for dealing with fishery system. So one of the outflow shall be also accounted for catches and net migration. Catches means fished organism or organisms that are catched by higher traffic levels. And then for each one of the compartments, you shall include, in terms of energy balance, the flows like respiration or backflow to detritus that is essentially representing excretion or exgestion or unexplained mortality. So mortality that is non-predatory mortality, so, but brings materials from the network into the detritus compartment. I recall you that the detritus compartment is a fundamental compartment in terms of necessary in order to build a consistent or to balance a consistent trophic network model. Okay, let's go on. What is a trophic network? Well, network of exchanges of resources between the elements, but may be biotic and abiotic of an ecosystem. Organisms that are feeding on the same prey belong to the same trophic level. So this is another definition which we are introducing here. We are talking a lot during this class about trophic levels and predation, consumption, and so on. Now we introduce another indicator, a new indicator that is the trophic level. Trophic level that is constructed on the basis essentially of the diet of the organism. So you subdivided all the organisms appearing to your ecosystem to different trophic levels, and in which you may, the trophic level indicator may also be a fractional number, but it is assigned to each compartment and it is based on the quantitative composition of its diet. In particular, we start by setting by convention a trophic level of 1 for the primary production and detritus, so detritus and primary production. I recall you primary production, algae or plants, are the base of a trophic chain, or are the base of a trophic network, so we attribute to these elements trophic level 1. Then we attribute trophic level value of consumers that is equal to 1 plus a weighted average of the trophic levels of the prey. The average is weighted in terms of the flows from the flow of prey onto the compartment of predators. The trophic level is averaged by the importance or magnitude of the flows between the different compartments. Here I'm trying to explain how it is calculated the trophic level. For example, the trophic level of compartment E is equal to 1, by definition, the trophic level of primary producer, plus unweighted average of the trophic level of the prey of this organism, of organism E. So you sum the number of prey and we weight the trophic level, we sum the number of trophic level of prey by weighting them in terms of the importance or magnitudes of the flows between the compartments. We have already seen this picture, which is a typical outcome of a Nicopath model in which we try to describe the interactions of the organism in the ecosystem of Palu de la Rosa, which is Laguna of Venice. Is a practical example of application of the ecopath model. You have already seen this type of picture. I told you that the dimension of the boxes in this schema are proportional to the biomass. So the more the biomass, the larger the boxes. Then for each boxes, you have to include information concerning the production and the consumption, PQ. And as you see here, we have collected, or if you want, clustered all the animals, organisms that are feeding on the same base in terms of food in different groups. So we have in the Palu de la Rosa, we have identified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 16 groups. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 17 groups clustered groups, boxes, and we are trying to describe the interaction in terms of predation and production for each boxes. Starting from the definition we have given, phytoplankton, what is primary production, plankton detritus, what is detritus, benthic detritus, or benthic unicellular algae or macroalgae, these are all pertaining to a first trophic level, primary production. So this is trophic level 1. And then the trophic level of the consumers' organisms are calculated on the basis of the praise, averaged, weighted with a weighted average that is weighted in terms of the importance of the flow of consumption. For example, we start trophic level 1 with small organisms, then trophic level 1 are predated by trophic level 2. Here you have, for example, slightly larger organisms, for example, worms, or small fishes, mackerels, or anchovies, and then larger fishes and so on, going up to sprat fishes. So this way of subdividing the various compartments in terms of trophic levels give you a new vertical axis that allows you to spread or display or if you want to distribute the various boxes into different trophic levels. So the lower trophic levels of production or primary production, then you have the higher trophic levels that go to fishes, up to carnivorous fishes, and then you have also higher trophic levels that are, for example, higher level predators like, for example, birds, or the man that is fishing, that is maybe seen as an element of a trophic network. It is the topmost element in terms of trophic level that is consuming. I recall you that this is the definition of a trophic level. Trophic level is equal to 1 plus the weighted average of the trophic levels of a praise. And the average is made with the importance of the amount of the flows from different. Why do we study trophic networks? We study trophic networks because we may have indication on emergent properties of ecological system. We have already seen these graphs. For example, here we are plotting mean trophic levels in function of time. So the mean trophic level of the organisms that pertains to a particular ecosystem, and we are studying how the mean trophic level evolves in time. For example, in this case, we have a clear decreasing of the average or mean trophic level in time, meaning that we have a kind of compression of a trophic network toward the lower level. And this is a clear indication that there is a kind of deformation or dystrophic behavior of a network in terms of, so what it is happening, and this is a typical case for eutrophication. We have a kind of collapsing fisheries, which we may have ecological, social, and economic consequences that comes from the exploitation of the oceans for fish and marine invertebrates that are both wholesome and valuable products, that ought to be a prosperous sector given the capture of fisheries. In contrast, for example, to agriculture and aquaculture, in which you may have a continually increasing harvests or continuously increasing yield due to the fact that we may implement technology and technological improvements in order to improve agricultural production. This is not possible, for example, for oceans, of course, because when we are fishing oceans, we are impacting directly on complex ecosystems. And what it may happen, as you can see from these graphs, is that you have a compression of the traffic networks toward the lower. This means that the biomass of the system is progressively switching from higher traffic levels, is passing toward the lower traffic level. This is a clear indication of eutrophic conditions in which you have bloom of growth of the lower trophic levels, for example, algal blooms, that are clear indications of the fact that the organism in the upper part of the trophic network are becoming more and more scarce. In terms of biomass, what it is happening from the ecological point of view is that the biomass of the system is progressively transferred toward the lower trophic levels. These are examples of data in which we are looking what's happened to the mean trophic levels of catches. For example, these are 4 different ecosystems. I do not recall which are the ecosystem, but the important part of the story from these graphs is that you see that while time is increasing in 1950, the trophic level, for example, the mean trophic level of this system was around 3 point something. 1994, the mean trophic level of this system has fallen near 2.8, 2.9. Same things happens in all these in these other ecosystems, B, C, and D. These are several types of ecosystems, coastal zones or marine areas, and so on. And these graphs are taken from the paper of Kloen, Our Evolving Concept of Eutrophication. I have already cited this paper during the class. But the important point is, as you see here, we were in 1950, high trophic level, and 1994, fall down. 1950, very high trophic level, 1994, mean trophic level. So these are all indicators of the compression of the trophic network towards the lowest trophic network. So fishing down marine food webs, this is the concept. We have already seen these graphs as well. This is graphs representing scales that are quite high trophic level animal, and mantis shrimps, but instead are very quite low trophic levels organisms. And you see that in times, as times evolves, you have at the higher trophic level biomass. This is the biomass. Sorry, these are the catches. So catches per unit effort, CPUE, means catches per unit effort. So it is how much it is catched by fishery vessels and brought inland and bring into the market. Onto the market, you see that while times advances, the scales that are higher trophic level organisms tend to disappear, while mantis shrimps or shrimps that are lower trophic level organisms tend to increase. This is something that is these graphs, I think, refers to the Northern Adriatic system. This is why we need an ecosystem approach to manage fisheries, because we need to understand what we are doing in terms of fisheries. For example, what we are doing when we are catching higher trophic level organisms like scales and giving space to the growth or lower trophic levels organisms. This is why trophic network models may be employed, or this is how better trophic network models may be employed to study emergent properties for emerging properties of complex ecosystems. Static models are phenomenological approaches. So we let us assume that the knowledge of flows of a picture will be enough to study the system. So this is a kind of assumption. We do not seek for any knowledge concerning the causality behind the flows. So we are making a raw analysis of biomasses and flows. I recall you the approach here is boxes and arrows. No knowledge on other details of the system, but on analytical focus. So we are taking pictures and we are giving up the pretension of giving predictions. Sorry. We start from the assumption that biomasses are the characteristics of the object or compartment that we are going to study. So flows are representatives of the relationships between the compartments. So again, the arrow and boxes paradigm. Boxes are described by biomasses, or in terms of fishery, we talk often of stocks, while the arrows are represented by the flows. So when we talk about fisheries, we think about catches between different between prey and predators. So it is a kind of thermodynamic approach. So we focus on macro variables and not on two individuals. It is useful to simplify our description because we need to simplify because ecosystems are complex systems. We are in a condition of scarcity of data or data of poor quality. We have a poor knowledge of the mechanisms and causal links. Often we have poor knowledge of a mechanism and causal links. An example of everyday life is the temperature of an organism. You measure the temperature of a sick person, and this is a very powerful or significant indicator of condition of the organisms. So we are switching from the Newtonian physics as opposed to ecology. Newtonian physics was based on determinisms, but that for the microscopic scales, we have to give up with our pretension of being too deterministic. So we switch from a strong determinism to an analysis of processes. Example, you cannot imagine to describe the effects of waves, for example, large quantity of water, by simply starting from the characteristics of the molecules of water. So you cannot imagine come to an explanation of how waves are formed and what are the effects of waves, only basing on the chemical characteristics of a molecule, of a water molecule. What we have to do is that we have to include an interaction with system boundaries, and we have to somehow enlarge the system boundaries by including some aspects in order to take into account the emergent properties of complex systems. Of course, by switching these from determinism to this holistic approach, we have to renounce to the concept of, we have to give up with the concept of reversibility, because we have to understand that ecosystems, living organisms and ecosystem are non-equilibrium dissipative structure, in which you may always encounter some kind of hysteresis that are describing non-reversible condition. For example, the ecological succession, as we will see soon, is a typical example of a reversible process in which there are some kind of hysteresis. What we mean by hysteresis, we mean that the path going to one direction, for example, in forest succession, is different from the path going into the reverse direction. We have several examples of this kind of hysteresis. The first graph here represents forest succession, while the second represents microcosm succession. So here we are describing the succession of large organisms, forests, trees, and here we are describing instead the succession of small organisms, bacteria. In this case, there is always a kind of hysteresis, which may be described with a sigmoidal-like curve, so a saturation curve that we have seen in several places during these classes, and that represents the fact that the way, one direction way is not the same of the other way direction. Be an example of ecological succession. So we have regular, well-defined pattern, for example, in the forest case, in which we have potential indicators of disturbance. And these are clearly not resulting from a program or encoding in the genome of the participating organisms. Instead, it is an emergent process that takes into account the community, the organisms, and the totality of their interactions. This is an example of forest succession. This is an example of what happened to a forest when you have fire. After some time from fire, you have a rebuilding of the forest, with a kind of emerging, and then after some years again, your primary forest becomes a wood with very defined characteristics. So a clear example of forest succession, you start from fires that destroy the forest, then you have a regrowth of organisms, and then you have a rebuilding of the forest or of the wood. So there is not a program. The one way is not defined a priori. Instead, the patterns are governed by the structure of the system, by interactions between the organisms that pertain to the system, and by the effects due to the forcing function or external systems, or external, what we call forcing function, or external influences to a system. In terms of succession, we have parallels between different systems. For example, the aging process in humans and other living organisms may be seen as a succession. When we build the trophic network models, the description of flows only is a very strong simplification. However, many data are always needed. I recall you that when we apply our box and flow approach, we need to describe a box in terms of biomass and of the flows. It is a simple but very powerful solution. Again, we apply the mass balance. So we apply a kind of steady state picture of the system. For every compartment of our box and arrows model, we assume that what goes in is equal to what goes out. Our continuity equation that we have seen several times during the class may be written in this way. So consumption is equal to production plus respiration plus unassimilated fluid, so losses during the process of consumption. Production may be written as predation mortality plus fishing plus other mortality plus net migration plus net export plus total mortality. Again, steady state. So we may include in production all the effects. So we assume that the balances, the in equal to out, forces us to assume the fact that the production should be evaluated in terms of all. The production should be equal to what goes out, to the totality of what goes out. I mean, we may see predation or fishing or other mortality or migration or exports, which all flows out of the system. And then we have to include also flow to detritus that accounts for other mortality, that's non-predatory mortality, plus losses due to the process of predation. Again, we look to steady state conditions, and we have seen that steady state may mean several states of the system. In particular, we have an oscillating system time is again a steady state, because you can individuate, for example, frequency and an amplitude of the oscillation. Or if we look at longer time span, steady state also may be seen as the switching from one condition, oscillating from one level of biomass to another condition. But this is a switch in the system which the total biomass of the system changes from biomass 1 to biomass 2. What we are changing here, we are changing the time scale, essentially. Or we may also observe some kind of we say time evolution. We have called this notice that it is not homeoresis. So we switch from homeostatic condition, example 1, example 2. So here we homeostasis is continuous. Instead, here the homeostasis changes from one level to another one. In the third example, we are in a condition of homeoresis. So we have a continuous evolution of the system in time. Again, please note that this type of description, this depends on the time scale that you assume. So what is changing from one graph to the other one in this picture are the time scale. How do we build a balanced trophic network model? So for each compartment, we have to employ our continuity equations that says that production is equal to what goes out is equal to what goes in production. What goes out is equal to what goes in terms of predation, fishing, other types of mortality or migration or export, minus what comes in. So we may quantify all this quantity by introducing these terms. In particular, capital B represents the biomass of the compartment, capital P represents the productivity, capital Q represents the consumption. Then there is a term that is called ecotrophic efficiency, that is a kind of parameter that you may employ to balance the network, as you will say. And then C is the catch, that includes landing plus discards. And DC, as we have seen already, is the matrix of a diet. So it is a matrix representing who is eating who and how much. This is an algebraic approach. In particular, the ecotrophic efficiency represents the fraction of production that it is used within the system. It's very hard to measure on the field. This is why we employ the ecotrophic efficiency as the free parameter for the balancing of a network. So the software EcoPath that we have seen, or that we have introduced here, employs the ecotrophic efficiency as a free parameter, but it is employed to balance the network. We are in condition of a we are in a condition of quasi-static network, which we have biomass accumulations, so a slow growth of biomass, and for each compartment, the equation that we have translated into our continuity equation is consumption equal to production plus an assimilated food plus what is loss with respiration. I'm not going to the details of this calculation because they're very simple. This is a mass balances into linear system. You can find details on the manual of the software EcoPath. When the system is solved, as I told you, the solution of the system is found by leaving the ecotrophic efficiency parameter free. And what we do is that we find several solutions for a balanced network, and we extract from all the pool of the solution of a balanced network those networks that respect some kind of constraints that we may call ecological constraints. In particular, for each node, or if you want, for each compartment, we have to assume mass conservation. This means that ecotrophic efficiency should be less than 1. I recall you that the ecotrophic efficiency is the percentage of the production that is employed in the system. So we look for balanced networks in which ecotrophic efficiency is smaller than 1. The energy conserved means that the respiration should be greater than 0. We cannot include respiration, negative respiration. And then we have some kind of parameter related to the physiology. So what we do is that we vary parameters within constraints until a kind of self-consistent solution, so which makes sense from the point of view of the ecologist, is achieved. The network cannot be calibrated according to the usual terms so we have discussed. Instead, what we are looking for is for balanced network that makes sense in ecological terms. So what we may say that the constraints, filters, the parameters combination which are mutually inconsistent. What is the consequence? Results are usually very robust to input uncertainty and also to the aggregations. Example, and we will finish soon the lecture of today, Northern Adriatic Sea. We are modeling a Northern Adriatic Sea with an EcoPath approach. In particular, this EcoPath, it is a free software for constructing balanced trophic network models of aquatic system. In EcoPath now, Willie Christensen have developed also some kind of spatial heterogeneity, what he call ecospace, and temporal evolution, what you call ecosym. So we have a temporal evolution ecosym and a two-dimensional spatial heterogeneity description with the ecospace. And then we have several balancing tools for studying the balanced network. And we have several network analytical tools. I'm going very fast because I want to go to the conclusions. This is the typical table what you have to fill in when you are. This is the EcoPath software, which, for example, you have to fill in all these. We have subdivided into groups, homogeneous groups, our network, our ecosystem, and then for each one of these groups, we may select some properties, for example, the habitat area, or with production versus biomass. So this is a production indicator, or a consumption versus biomass. This is a consumption indicator. And then you shall indicate production versus consumption and exports from the detritus, but is an effect of balancing the network. For example, so you start by introducing for each of your boxes or each of your species information. Is a basic input, then you may have information on diet composition and what goes to detritus and so on. And then you end up, after clicking on the balance, you end up with a prey-predator matrix that links the effect of predations, and you have to check out that all the parameters that are calculated, in particular ecotrophic efficiencies for each compartment, make sense. In particular, there are some, in some conditions, for example, you have values of, I recall you that the ecotrophic efficiency should be smaller than 1. So you have to discard or to correct this condition in which you may end up from the balanced network with ecotrophic efficiencies that are larger than 1. And in particular, what you shall input as data is the mass balance, so evaluation of the stocks, and information concerning the diets. After this kind of, after you insert all this information, EcoPath provides you with various ways of representing the results of a network, in particular as composition of the elements into various trophic levels, lower trophic levels, like detritus, discard, bacteria, and phytoplankton. These are the trophic levels pertaining to what we have called trophic levels 1. And then we move to higher trophic levels, in particular invertebrates, for example, taxonomy into 12 compartments, or we go to fish that are higher trophic levels, and then we go to seabirds or dolphins that are the topmost trophic levels elements. This kind of analysis, okay, we include also the fleets. For example, for Italy, we have 5, and Croatia and Slovenian fleets that are fishing to the Adriatic. Let me go back, I show you that. You may indicate the quantity of material that is brought away from fishing catches in the fishery panel of the basic input. Okay, from this kind of analysis, this kind of analysis is based on a complex choice of input data. It is time consuming, in particular for our model for Adriatic. We employed 34 groups. For each, we have to search for the biomass, for the production biomass, consumption biomass, the diets, and so on. Biomass, of course, are hard to estimate. A very approximate estimation coming from the evaluation of what it is landed. So you go to fish markets and you try to evaluate how many kilograms per unit time of a particular species is landed. So this is the biomass. Then you have to estimate the biomass, biomass over production divided by biomass, that is specific production and specific consumption. You have to include information of the diet, very few data, and then you have to include information on the catches of the effect of the humans or human society that is fishing down the marine ecosystem. In particular, for a diet composition, the matrix DC, we have very few information, and these are typical biologist work in which you bring the fish into a biology laboratory, you open it, and you make an evaluation of the stomach content of the feces in order to find indication on the diet of the various animals. So you see that you have an enormous amount of data needed in which you have an enormous amount of uncertainties to this data, in particular the biomasses, the diets, the physiology of animals, and so on. But the point is that you try to hinder all these uncertainties by looking for a balanced network in which, for example, significant parameters like ecotrophic efficiencies are smaller than one and respirations are not negative. Um, okay, by having your network subdividing this way, you have EcoPub provides you several analytical tools for understanding or for looking at the performance of the behavior of a network. In particular, in the case of a Northern Adriatic ecosystem, if you look at the Lindemann spine analytical tool, we immediately see that trophic level 2, this one, dominates on all other trophic levels. So we have an important compression of the system on the higher trophic level in which the biomass is passed all onto trophic level 2. Fortunately, not 1, because if we were on trophic level 1, this would represent a dead system. In reality, the Northern Adriatic Sea is still a living system with some problems, and the problems are described by the fact, for example, that the biomass is transferred for 40% to trophic level 2, which flows and biomass dominates. This is trophic level 2 refers to zooplankton that represent a bottleneck with low trophic efficiency. So we have low trophic efficiency, so trophic transfers from trophic level 2 to trophic level 3, and so on. Global trophic efficiency for this network is 12.9. And the software will present you different spines for detritus primary production. Here, 66% of flows comes from detritus, that is a microbial loop, and represent a mature successional stage. In this case, given that 66% of the flows are referring to a lower trophic level of a microbial loop, that means between trophic level 1 and trophic level 2, this means that the system is a mature system, and we are in a mature successional stage. Okay, you have several other indicators like the mixed trophic impact. The only thing I want to say to finish this lecture is that the idea of analyzing this trophic network like this is that of finding where control comes into a network. For example, you see that the bottleneck in terms of zooplankton, here we are representing how much is the biomass, sorry, how much is the trophic efficiency. We are representing trophic efficiencies of the various of two elements. Here we are studying zooplankton, phytoplankton, and the trophic efficiency on the other group of network. So these are all the group of trophic networks that we have employed for building a trophic network model of a Northern Adriatic system. So we go from seabirds, sharks, so higher trophic networks, to the lowest trophic network. But we see that in particular seabirds, shark rays, and so on, and yakes, and zoobentivorous fishes are strongly impacted by zooplankton and phytoplankton. Why this? Because of course these higher trophic networks with higher trophic levels organisms feed on zooplankton, phytoplankton. But here you have a way of measuring numerically this impact. And in particular, you may identify the key groups in terms of control, and you have various ways of evaluating this kind of controls. In this case, you may see that predators and fish do not influence the systems, not even other fishes, with the exception of small anchovy and sardine. So does this mean that we have a bottom-up control? This means that it is the anchovies and sardine fish stocks that are controlling what's happening in the upper trophic networks, or we have an bottom-up control means that are the smaller organisms that are controlling the biomass of the higher trophic level organisms, or we may have a top-down control. For example, this is what happens with fisheries, which, for example, fishery activity, which is the higher trophic level due to catches humans, may control the quantity of biomass into a lower trophic organism. Okay, in the past, this is the story of Lotka and Voltaire analysis systems. So in the past, we tried to do dynamic analysis like the prey-predator models of Lotka Volterra. And now things are changing because, of course, we are much more complex. We are looking at much more complex ecological system in which, for example, we may employ ecosystem food web simulations in order to study evolution of this kind of ecosystems. Okay, for now on, stop here today. Do you have any questions?